even as it plans to withdraw troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. government is building up its forces in Asia in preparation for what many people believe is a conflict down the road with China. I'm joined now by Stephen Glane. He is the author of State versus Defense. And Stephen, I'll put it to you directly. Are we on a collision course with China, as Neil Ferguson and others are arguing?
The two sides are talking past one another. The Americans are saying to the Chinese, we welcome your peaceful rise as a global power, but we are not going to concede any one iota of our control of the sea lanes of Asia. The Chinese are saying, you had your manifest destiny, you had your Monroe Doctrine, and we expect to be treated with the same prerogative. China is, after all, a 3,000-year-old country. Asia has been, throughout most of that history, Sino-centric.
Right, so they're saying this is our sphere of influence, and we're going to basically do what we want in this region as you do in the Western Hemisphere.
Exactly, and we as a nation have to decide whether or not we want to deny them that destiny.
Right, and as you mentioned in another segment, they are our largest creditor, and that certainly has got to complicate the discussions that are going, especially right now, after the downgrade. China came out, and I think rightfully so, is very critical of how we've handled ourselves.
Of course. Yeah, there's kind of an otherworldly atmosphere to this whole build-up. The Pentagon, as I mentioned before, is in the middle of an enormous military build-up in Asia, in addition to the deployments that it already has there. And they, as I said, they show no sign of conceding even what they call green water territory, which is China's coastal province. China, in lockstep or in response, is beginning to develop not just green water force projection capability, but blue water force projection.
So meaning aircraft carriers and things of that nature.
Battle groups, and they're also developing weapons technologies that will allow them to deny the U.S. Navy access to some of what it considers to be key choke points in the region. Absent a good faith attempt to negotiate this thicket of disputes between China and Taiwan and the Philippines and Brunei and Vietnam and others, I think it's inevitable, sure. The Chinese are not going to back down. Now, to those who would say, well, we've got to bottle them up, we need to contain them, lest they become a menacing global power. There's nothing in those 3,000 years of Chinese history that suggests that is China's ambition. They have always been the middle kingdom between heaven and earth, and on the contrary, they've always remained close to their own territory. Now that may change, but who's to say if it does change, it won't be because of a provocation from the United States?
Right, that's a great point. I mean, so it seems to me you think that if, for lack of a better, left to their own devices, China would not be a threat to the region, at least not militarily.
Well, I think they certainly expect, and again, we go back to the Tang Dynasty, they expect their neighbors to play a subordinate role in their relationship with them, and the United States has an obligation to support their allies to the extent that they can. We should also remind ourselves, however, that the allies that we helped develop economically in the 50s, 60s, and 70s are now the richest countries on earth.
Right.
And they certainly have the resources to develop a compelling deterrent that would support their sovereign prerogatives.
Right. And could we really stop? I mean, if China invaded Taiwan tomorrow, what could we really do about it?
That's a very good point. Taiwan is almost indefensible. And we have, for example, the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit in Okinawa, which is a formidable force. But all of its support units are back in the U.S. They'd have to wait for all that to catch up with them from Camp Pendleton. So there isn't much they could do. Ditto the 2nd Infantry Division on the Korean Peninsula. They're right on the line.
Right.
If the North Koreans, for some addled reason, decide that they were going to start another Korean War, that group is very much isolated.
Right, so that might explain the buildup of forces in the region that you're talking about, supply lines and things of that nature.
I think the Pentagon has pretty much written off North Korea as an imminent or an existential threat. It is a dangerous country, but it's relative to the way they look at China as a long-term asymmetrical threat. North Korea is pretty much off the radar. I think it's pretty much all about China.
I know it's a difficult thing to predict, but are we just going to have this sort of standoff type environment for the foreseeable future, or do you see things coming to ahead in to the next decade?
I think, well, again, without a restoration of America's diplomatic resources, and without giving them the lead role in our relations with China, and to be fair, I mean, the State Department and the Defense Department work very closely on these things, but without an admission by the United States of its limitations, both fiscal and military, with regards to a country that is the most populated in the world, absent that recognition, that acknowledgement, that concession, I think some kind of conflict with China between the U.S. and China is inevitable, probably in our lifetime.